it's great that you're paying these people, bottom dollar for the thing. But when you do that, then you got to have the person doing the job. Then you got to have a manager on top of them. And then you have some kind of other QA manager on top of them. And then some kind of project manager, you got 3-4 layers. I don't want to manage 3-4 layers. What used to be networking was all about, flying to San Francisco and going to a conference and, paying for an expensive hotel, expensive flight and expensive ticket and, walking around and putting your business card in people's hands all the time. Now I just invite them to the show. If I had known how effective of a networking tool podcasting is, shit, I would have done this 10 years ago.
Welcome to the Quest for Questions podcast, where each week I ask not so common questions to not so common humans in search of not so common answers. Joining me today is 40 hours a week cog in a corporate machine turned business owner and digital nomad. He's 15 years of experience with all kinds of digital marketing and running a fully remote online business made for a very engaging chat full of actionable advice. Here are the 3 things you're gonna learn today. How to run a business while traveling without losing your mind, all clients. What to focus on when creating any type of content, and hint, it's not the search engine, nor is it the social platform. And finally, how to use podcasting to A, find new clients, B, build relationships, and C, educate yourself. This is Konrad, Yerba, Addict, and here's one and only Jeff Mendelson. Enjoy. So let's dive right into it, and let's go back in time machine to 2006, so you can share a bit about your story. So the way I was listening, in 2006, you were still working your corporate job, and you were just having your first kind of dipping your toe into, transitioning into entrepreneur and starting your own business. And I think the first thing you started selling was websites. So can you kind of take us back to that moment, 2006, and maybe share like what made you make that transition at that point of your life? And why, of all things, was it, selling websites, like digital marketing, not, something else?
Sure. So, first of all, let's go back to that time, right? So, yeah, I think this was still the AOL days. People were just starting to get, like DSL connections into their house. Like, it wasn't such a, it was only just becoming to be popular in terms of what people needed and how they needed it. So I had always worked in technology jobs, right? So I was always the pre-sales engineer. So I would be like the technical guy on the sales team, talking about technology. Like, so the sales guy would say like, yeah, our stuff is awesome. And then I would say, yeah, it's awesome because we can connect into X, Y, and Z systems, right? My problem with that, though, was I was always working in these jobs and I was never really challenged, right? Every time I try to break out or try to get into like, something newer and exciting, I was always, sort of slapped down, right? And I was bored. I was bored out of my skull.
How old were you at this point?
Oh, it was 30s. Yeah, about early to mid 30s. And what would happen is I would go to work and I would get everything that I needed to get done by like 11:30 in the morning, right? And it's like, okay, great. Now what? You can't go home, right? I'm not a smoker, and at that time, like what smokers would do is that they'd go outside to go smoke a cigarette or whatever. So I'm not going to go hang out with them, right? And it's just, well, now what? Like, now what am I going to do? So, I was working as a pre-sales engineer for a credit card processing company that process credit cards for internet businesses. So a lot of my job was interfacing with with websites, to enable them to accept credit cards, which was, go back to 2006, wasn't so easy, right? You needed a gateway, you needed all this other stuff. So we needed like, we were able to make it a lot easier to integrate big companies and to start charging for their content, right? And what happened was, around that same time, everybody in the United States was becoming a real estate agent, right? So, there was that big real estate thing. Everybody was buying houses. If you had a heartbeat, you would qualify for a mortgage. And people were just making money hand over fist, with that, by doing that. So what did I do? I was like, yeah, I'm going to go get a license as well to do that. Right. So what happened? So I go out and I go get my mortgage broker license, right? Because I'm like, I don't have time to show people houses. I'll just help people get loans,
Mm.
for it. And I realized very early that I had zero aptitude for this, right? Where I tried to refinance the mortgage for my brother. It was like I was the only one he was talking to, and I couldn't even get that done, right? I mean, I messed it up so bad. So it's like, okay, I realized that I had no aptitude for this, and it's like, finally, a friend of mine told me, "Okay, Jeff, you're not good with the mortgage stuff, but you built a nice website. Why don't you go pursue that?" Right. So then I start looking around. Okay, how can I make websites easier? And that's where I came across the Joomla content management system, the WordPress content management system, and I'm like, oh, like this is really easy to start. To start creating websites. So I put a few feelers out, and then people started coming out of the woodwork. Right, all of a sudden I had this one lady in Orlando who was she had a marketing company, and she had like 50 websites that she was managing under her umbrella, and she had this web developer that was just absolutely raping her on every little change that needed to happen across all these websites, right? And all of these changes were like things that I could do in about 7 seconds, right? It's like
Mm.
you don't need to charge somebody $100 to change a password or to change a title or things like that. And that's exactly what this guy was doing. So I told her, look, I will, let's make a retainer, right? Pay me X number of dollars per month, and I'll handle everything. Boom. That just changed my world completely, right? Because now I was like, wait a second, and this is in addition to my day job, right? My day job, I got little kids at home, I got a mortgage to pay, and I'm like, now I have an extra $1,000 a month in my pocket, and I'm like, oh my God, this is all I need are like four of these people, and I'll be able to quit. Like it really started registering with me, right? And that's exactly what I started doing. I started, since I was so bored at work and they weren't giving me anything, that anyone who would walk past my desk would see me with, fingers on keyboards, like that. And they would be like, wow, that Jeff, man, he's so productive. He's a great guy. He's this, he's that. I was building my own business, right? I was teaching myself these content management systems. I was handling clients. So instead of going out and, smoking with the boys, I would go out and, on my cell phone and, close deals and things like that. And that's where it got good to me, right? That's where it got like, okay, this is interesting, right?
Mm.
And around that time as well, like there were a lot of transitions, especially in corporate America. I just kept on, here's a fun fact. You go to my LinkedIn profile, none of the companies that I work for are in existence today in their present form, right?
Yeah.
They're all dead. Yeah, they're all dead. And they all happened like after I left. So right. So, and I would be at these companies and I would get like they would give me awards like the most productive employee of the month, the best employee of the year, stuff like that. And 6 months later, I'd be laid off, and I'm just like, please do not give me this stuff anymore. Like I was a corporate killer. And then finally, when I got fired, was it now 12 years ago for the last time, I was like, that's it, no more. I'm not going back to this. And it was a very scary time because by that time I had already developed my $5 a day Starbucks habit, and the mortgage and the diapers and going to school and, all that stuff. It just, it weighed on me, but thank God I've been able to build this and keep on going, where, at this point it's practically made me certified unemployable, right? Simply because I started out creating websites, and then I created, and then I got my own server. So I started hosting them. Hosting turned out to be a really good way to keep clients, within my wheelhouse, right? Because I'm hosting the site for them.
Mm.
And it was pretty easy for me to do. When I started figuring out that there was a lot more money to be made after the fact, after you build the website for somebody, right? By doing their paid ads, by creating content for them, by running their social media, things like that. Then it was like, okay, wait a second, there's really something here. And that's where I started to build up this a wider book of business, for the content marketing part, search engine optimization, the paid ads and all that, and that's where it really started to get interesting, because now I have all these different disciplines going on, inside my wheelhouse. And it was a lot of fun, right? It was just a lot of fun.
Mm,
And I was able to do it from, either from working from home. Eventually I got a subscription to WeWork so that I could go to their offices, whenever I wanted. And it just made it was just this, it was such an exhilaration of, of freedom, right? Being
mm,
able to, get out there and just, if I wanted to take a 2-hour lunch, yeah, go for it. If I wanted, at first I was like always, if I traveled from like a Thursday to a Monday, right? It's like you have to send emails to all your clients. Okay, I'm going now. Yep. Don't talk to me. I'm going to be on vacation, whatever, right? Because, there was one time I went to Mexico City for a weekend like that, and I kept the internet data thing on. I kept it on roaming, and I came back with $1,000 bill, for roaming. So, that got expensive really quick, right?
mm.
But once I knew how to manage that, then I just stopped. I just stopped telling people, right? It just, the cost of all this stuff went down to nothing. Now I don't even tell people when I travel, right? I don't make a point of it, and a lot of my clients are like friends with me on Facebook, so they see where I am, right? It's not like I'm hiding it, right?
Mm.
But the fact that I am able to just take my laptop, open it up, and go do it from wherever is just, it's the ultimate freedom, right? It's just so great. Like what was it, like 2.5 years ago? I managed to take my kids with me to Hong Kong and Japan, right? And that was great because, like, we're just walking around central Hong Kong, and I get this text, hey Jeff, we need you to sign a contract. I'm like, great, now what do I do? Oh, there's a WeWork down the street. So we go into the WeWork and print out the contract, sign it, and then I'm good. And then, the kids are like, hey, there's air conditioning in here, we really like it. So we ended up staying there for a few hours, meet some more people, and it was great, right? Because I was like, how else would I have gotten in there and meet those people if I hadn't, had to, stop in and say hi,
Mm.
so that kind of stuff is just so, it's so much fun. The whole change in latitude is just a great way to, be more creative, get out of your comfort zone, and to just make it more interesting to, make my work more interesting all the way around.
Hmm. But your story seems a bit, how to say, different than usual, because it sounds like when you were still in the corporate, you were actually a really good employee. Like you were getting the awards and you were doing good. A lot of people, who say they're, so-called entrepreneurs and they decide to go, they usually say like, "Oh, I was, corporate world wasn't really for me." It wasn't for you, but at the same time, you built out a lot of, you built up a lot of skill set. So when you finally made the change,
I
um,
milked it for every ounce I could. I made them pay for my education. I had, the health benefits that I needed, to pay for the family at the time. The only thing I didn't have was flexibility to get out there. I was always, it's like you go in and you're expected to do one thing, right? And when you do one thing, it's like, okay, it's like I finished this one thing at 11 o'clock in the morning. Wait, I want to do something else. Oh no, no, you're just a pre-sales engineer. You can't be doing any of that, right? Okay. Like, I'll just go back to my computer then and build more websites. It's like, and nobody stopped me. So I ran with it. You know.
and what made you stick with the like the website digital marketing? Was it that this was like that thing that got you the initial like clients results, and you were like, "Oh, this is working, so I'm just gonna pursue this and try to see where it takes," or was it just like some deep fascination with how the whole marketing world works and how it's changing and how there's so many components to it?
I would say it was both. So if I had to zoom out a little bit, all a website is a foundation, right? And usually when you build a website for someone, for a company, whatever, it's like, it's two maximum three checks that you get. You either get an initial deposit, or a mid project check, and then the end of the project check, right? And then that's it. You have to go out and sell again, right? With I didn't like going out and reselling myself each and every time, right? Because you go out and you sell this project, and then you finish it up and you say, okay, thank you for the memories. That's not like, okay, like, I finished it. And what I found was, not some, but all websites need marketing afterwards, right? If they don't have a plan for marketing, then like, why are you building it in the first place? Like, like, seriously, you can't just like build a website and walk away, or build it and they will come. It doesn't work like that. You still got to promote it. You still have to set up like newsletters. You still have to set up email marketing. You have to set up paid ads. Your website is your story. You don't just build a store and then, all right, thank you, like, and we'll see who shows up. Those kind of stores don't make it, right? So that's how I got it. So that's how I figured out that building a website at the time was really my foundation, my foot in the door, so that I could sell them on the other services going forward. And now, I'd say over the past 5-7 years at least, I don't take a website project unless I also have the marketing project, right? If they just want me for the website and that's it, I'm not interested. It's not interesting. It's just, like, what are you going to do with it? Oh, we're going to have our internal team. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Have them do it. Like, I just won't take the job.
Mm. So I guess it goes along with the because I think where it gets interesting, and I'm interested in your story there and how did it happen, is that to transition from, okay, you got some clients right at the beginning and you start doing websites for them and stuff, but this is where a lot of people also get stuck. That yeah, they get some independence freedom in a way, but they forever they forever are freelancers. Like they never make the transition to actually having a business. And then kind of the location independent stuff, it's there, but it's not really there. Like it's just in theory, but you still kind of are a slave to the client. You still have to always be there. You have to do that. So I have a quote actually from you that you said that you had this mindset shift from like yes sir to have you ever thought about this? So I'm curious, like, where was that transition for you? Was it like some specific, moment? Was it like some steps that you took, to take it from, okay, you get clients, you deliver the work, to then actually making a business out of it, and then being able to, like, as you said, travel and not even tell the clients? It couldn't be overnight. So I'm curious, what was the transition for you, and also what was like your mindset shift in that period?
I would say it has more to do with the fact that, since I am working from my laptop and any Wi-Fi connection will suffice, right? At the end of the day, it didn't really matter, because when you're working as a freelancer, independently, solopreneur, or whatever you want to call it, you're not really tied down to a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 office thing. Someone's going to send you an email, maybe they'll send you a text, or they'll schedule a call. So it doesn't really, it's not like you're necessarily tied down to something. Right. And like for me, if I travel to Europe, like right now, you're what, 5-6 hours ahead of me, right? I would just know, and and budget my time, as you will, that in the mornings when I'm in, yeah, when I'm in Poland, I know that I have the morning free, because everyone is sleeping in the US at 11 o'clock in the morning, in Warsaw time, right? So then when the afternoon comes around, then okay, I need to check my phone a little bit more. I need to check to make sure that everything's working. I mean, now we can do 90% of what I need to do from my phone, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I can log into the back end of WordPress sites. I can go to, I can check stats on Google Analytics. I mean, there's an app for everything now. So it also, what happens is that, in parallel, I built a team, right? So it's not just me being the solo guy. Like I have the content writers on my team. I have a project manager on my team. I have the paid ad guides on my team. So it's their responsibility to handle their particular parts of the service. And it's not like I'm hiding them away from my clients. Like they interface with the clients directly, right? We're working as a team, we're working as an agency. So that does not always require Jeff to be in front of the camera, from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. Right. So you could really sort of just, really just get away and, and still be able to attend to them. Like for me, it's like, I don't really take vacations. Right. So it's not like, so for me to take a 7-day vacation without looking at email or without like, I don't know if I could do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know. There is a certain amount of, of comfort, if you will, just knowing that your business isn't going to crap while you're at the beach. Right. So what happens, you check in and, the people around me and, my kids, my wife, everyone knows. It's like, okay, yeah, I make that as long as I'm not annoying about it, as long as I'm not checking emails while we're eating. Right. Or checking emails while, while my feet is wet in the, and in the sand, then okay, like you can do it, you can sort of manage it. And I think everyone needs to find that balance, right? They need to find that balance of what works for them. I would say the only real interesting times is, well, when you go on a cruise, because a cruise is really when you're away for days at a time and it's difficult to check in. But everything else, I mean, now I have international roaming through T-Mobile, in like 90 different countries. So it's really, I land in England, I land in Spain, I land in Ukraine, and it's like my phone works and it's connected and I don't have to pay for anything and it's there and I'm still, and it's great, because I didn't lose a step.
Hmm. So I would love for you to share a little bit about the building that great team, because that's, I think, a bit of like not a controversial topic, but I think people have different takes on it. Some people in that space, especially, that in the location dependent business, so like kind of online business, some people are on this camp of like, hey, let's find this like the cheapest, labor, and let's just create processes and, outsource it, and then, create this kind of network where, you outsource it, they still do the job, but you always have to be there because they cannot think for themselves. But you seem to be on this other camp where you kind of recruited people that are able to kind of replace you. They're able to think for themselves. They're able to like kind of talk with clients. So I'm curious if you have any kind of like your thoughts on this subject, and also maybe some tips for like how to find that, those that team members that are gonna do like creative work, and you can build the team around. If you have some things that you kind of
Sure.
found out throughout the years that are some good tips to doing that.
Sure. So, I would say, especially 10 years ago, it was very controversial to hire people in India. Like a lot of companies in the US were outsourcing their entire call centers, customer service centers, to India or the Philippines or, places like that. And they weren't a good culture fit for that particular company because you would get people that would, like you said, like the procedures would be so rigid that they can't step outside the boundaries in order to be creative, right? Let's just use the cable company example, right? If I call up and say, well, I'm going to quit my cable company, and then they call up this customer service and they speak with this sweet girl in Manila, who is just like, oh, Mr. Mendelson, thank you so much. It's like, no, but I'm yelling at you. Oh, but we thank you for your 5 years of business and da, 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 da. So it's like there's a disconnect, right? What I would say to what I would say to your statement is this. um I take full responsibility for the actions of my team. Okay. So let's just start with that umbrella statement,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what happens is that I need to ensure that I am putting the right person, to do the right job. Okay. So I have, for example, 2 programming teams that I work with on a regular basis. One of them is very literal. Okay, I'm not gonna throw in the nationalities here, but one of them is very literal. You tell them to do X, they do X, and they do it like that. It's great. But you tell them to do X, but use your judgment on what color to use, you'll get something less than stellar, right? And the other programming team, I can do that, right? I can tell them, hey, I want to build this interface, and I want it to look nice, and I want it to do X, Y, and Z. Beautiful. A week later, they come back and they have a interface. It may not be the prettiest, but it does the job, and the customer doesn't care, so it's all good, right? So what happens? It really comes down to training and mindset, right? So if I have this um if I have this process that I need to that I need to convey, it's up to me to show everyone on my team exactly what I'm expecting of them. I mean, they can't divine it, right? They can't just look into my head and understand what I see as aesthetically pleasing versus someone else thinks it's aesthetically pleasing. It has to be communicated somehow. And what I found is people who do not convey that clearly enough, they're the ones who get frustrated when their project doesn't go right, where they tell their developer, build me something nice. And all right, well, define nice, right? So that's a problem, right? And that's not a problem with the Indian developer, the Filipino developer, the Ukrainian developer, the Argentinian developer. It's not a problem with them. It's a problem with you, right? Because you didn't define it, right? I mean, my whole career has been built on creating functional specs for people, right? Being the pre-sales engineer for, a credit card payment processing company, I had to tell each and every company what they needed to do to interface with our product, right? So I'm all about screenshots, putting arrows, boxes, flow charts, like, I do that in my sleep, right? So then when I go and I convey that to programmers, they're like, oh my God, Jeff, this is really great. Why? Because I've done this before, right? Now take somebody who's just starting out and, like they get this contract for, to build a website for, for a company, but they don't really know how to do it. So they go on Upwork and they tell the Upwork people, hey, I need a website that does X, Y, and Z, right? Great. Well, X, Y, and Z can mean a lot of different things, right? So if you didn't write out a solid spec of exactly what it is you're looking for and exactly what you want the back end to do and how information is supposed to get there and how it's supposed to be processed and shipped out, then that's all left up to interpretation. And if it's interpreted, then, well, the interpretation may come out wrong, so that's really, what you need to be on the lookout for. So what I find, to answer your question specifically, is, I try to hire the best people for the job, and that's not necessarily the cheapest, right? But it is the most culturally and professionally appropriate that I find for my types of clients, and also my personality, right? Because I don't want to be, I don't want to be micromanaging anybody, right? I just don't want to be in that. I just don't want to be in that space. I'd say a lot of people, that big time people that are creating systems, and we're getting our $4 an hour VAs from the Philippines and all that. That's great. Yeah, it's like for $4 an hour. I tell people I should have an office in downtown Manila. I should have somebody making me coffee in the morning, when I come in and answering my phones, right? It's like, great, but I don't live in Manila, and I haven't been there yet, right? And it's not, it's great that you're paying these people, bottom dollar for the thing, but when you do that, then you got to have the person doing the job, then you got to have a manager on top of them, and then you have some kind of other QA manager on top of them, and then some kind of project manager. You got 3-4 layers. I don't want to manage 3-4 layers. I don't. Right? I would much rather have, pay someone, 10, 20, maybe even $30 an hour to do the same job, but then I don't need to worry about it. Right? And so, I mean, let's just take content creation for a minute, right? I used to hire cheap, for creating content, right? So there was one time I had, we needed to write a blog post for a sushi restaurant. Okay. So get this, a sushi restaurant that was in Sunrise, Florida, right? Sunrise is like a suburb of Fort Lauderdale, right? And Sunrise is also local to Plantation and Cooper City and, like a few of these different places. The $4 an hour writer started sending me blog posts talking about sushi plantations and sushi sunrises. And it's like, no, you missed it. Like, Sunrise is the name of a city, right? It's a name, it's like, okay, it's not as popular as Chicago, but it's, it's the name of the city. I thought I was clear about that in my spec, right? So yeah, you can't, so obviously that didn't work. Now, when you get people, at the $20, $30 level, or maybe, people either in the United States or expat Americans or whatever, for whatever it is that that I'm hiring for, it's like, yeah, they sort of understand that because, we have city names here that can mean all kinds of different things. Right.
Mm.
So, they would write more about a blog post that talked about the sushi, about a neighborhood sushi restaurant that's local to these places. Right. So what I found is I don't want to manage to that level. Right. I want to manage I want to go to bed at night knowing that the stuff is done. And if it means I have to pay a little bit more in order to get it, then that makes me sleep sounder at night. You follow?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Have you also like run into this, because like this whole, having like remote team and having people from, international team, it's all great. But one big challenge that I found, and that's kind of a root of all problems, is the kind of miscommunication problem, right? Like, how do you, like, normally when you're in the same office and stuff, it's like a lot easier to explain everything, or like ask each thing and clarify if something is not clear, then ask a question. Have you also run into this problem? Has it also been like a really big obstacle when it comes to having like a remote team for
Sure.
you?
So it's always an obstacle. It always has been and always will be. Right. That said, COVID has made a lot of people really need to step up their game on this, right? Because um, before this, part of my yearning for travel, right, was to meet the people that I'm hiring in all these different places, meet
Oh,
them in person, break bread with them, right, and get to know them in person. I mean, right now, you're this 2-inch postage stamp size square, but imagine if I was to fly over and meet you and we were to go have coffee and shoot the shit for a little bit, that would be great, right? Then I'd be a real person to you,
yeah.
right? And once you do that, then it's like, like I keep these people around for years, right? It's
Mm.
I try to do good business with them, and and they remember me, and it's like, well, how many other of your contractors came to visit you, in Krakow, in Montevideo, in Santa Fe, Argentina, in Tel Aviv, Israel, and all these places. And it's like, not many, right? Or not any, right? So what happens? It just really cements that bond. So what happened? Just talking about communication. Yeah, you're right. Um, think about it this way. It doesn't matter to me whether you're across the street or halfway around the world. You're the same remote to me, right? We're
Yeah,
still
that's true.
talking over video conferencing software. We're still sending messages on chat, on Slack or WhatsApp or whatever. We're still sending emails. And if you are not verbose, if you are not, clearly get your point across, either within my project management tool or within Slack or on the phone call, then you're right. I have no business communicating with you. Right.
Mm.
So, I mean, that to me is a prerequisite. You gotta over communicate, right? You gotta, you can't, don't just send me a text message saying, hey, it's broken. Can you check it out? Tell me what you did first. Tell me what happened. Tell me what you think is wrong. It's like, put a little muscle into it, right? And then at least I can go in, I can go in and I can change it, right? Or you can go in and change it, right? But really what it comes down to is that communication, right? You have to be able to foster that communication so that it works for, so that it works for everyone, so that it works for me and also works for you.
Yeah, it seems like you gotta like a bit, I guess you said, over communicate, because you cannot pick up those nuances. So a lot of times you gotta like maybe say more than you would normally say like verbally to somebody, and they would be
Hmm.
able to pick up, but you have to kind of add a little more like story nuance, like what, are you saying it angry? Are you saying it, calm voice? Like what's the situation, right?
Right. So, video is great for that, right? And now we have these apps that can, you can send very quick videos, like either on WhatsApp or BombBomb or Dub, you can, so you can, so I can convey, whether I'm pissed, whether I'm happy, or whether I'm just normal, but sometimes it's just easier to do a screen share and just show you how to do it. Or it's just easier to record, like, okay, I need you to do one, I need you to do two, and I need you to do three, right? It really comes down to communication, right? If you're not good at communicating, then you should be doing this on your own, right? And
Mm.
it's like, then you won't have a lot of joy, hiring other people out to do it, because you're not communicating your needs clearly enough.
Mm. That's a good point. That's a good point. I hope people are listening.
Yeah,
uh,
right.
so let's go like zoom out to in general the digital marketing. I think one thing I'm really curious about, and it's a bit of like an open-ended question, which is like, now through this 17 years of experience, like what's like, let's say one thing that you kind of believe it's true, but most people in that space kind of would disagree with you. There has to be something that you see a lot of people like juggling in the same opinions on, and you maybe have a different take on. So I'd be really curious to hear that.
My controversial opinion on this is that all of these tools that we have, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and, Pinterest and all that, the core of these channels and, how they work and how they interact, you know, within themselves and with each other, right? Is that it's all based on people, right? It's all based on, customizing the user experience for me. When I turn on my Facebook here, my Facebook looks a lot different than yours,
Mm.
right? It looks a lot different than my wife's, who's in the other room, right? So it's all very different. So what happened was, especially in the days where people were trying to game the search engines, right? Search engine optimization, right? I always saw this as I'm playing a game of football, soccer in the US, right? Against a team that changes the rules on me at will, and I just have to live with it. Right. So I'm running around the field and I'm like, oh no, you're offsides. No, I'm not. No, you are, because that's the new rule, right? Like, what are you going to do about it? And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, right? And the rules keep changing every couple of months. What has stood the test of time, and I think what a lot of people don't realize, is that if you start writing content and you start producing content and you produce good content, then Google is going to reward you for it, regardless of how well you optimize the keywords, the H1 tags, the H2 tags, you put in meta titles, meta descriptions, you connect it to different directory sites, and come on, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be writing a blog post for a search engine. You should be writing a blog post for people, right?
Mm.
And that goes for, just about anything, like these tools are now very smart. Like, they can figure out the intent very quickly, of who's writing it. I mean, I can read a blog post and I can tell whether it was written by someone whose first language is English or not, right?
Mm.
And sometimes I can even tell, like the regional English, whether it's British English or Canadian English or, or Filipino English, right? It's still the English language, but there are nuances to it, that make it identifiable. And if I can pick it up, you better believe that Google can, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say here is that you really need to create the experience for the person that you are targeting, not the search engine or the social channel that you're targeting. And I think once you understand and internalize that, then you're going to be like, okay, that's just going to change the game for everybody, because then you're going to take better pictures for Instagram. You're going to make better memes for, for Pinterest. You're going to write better articles that get searched for and found better on Google and Bing.
So in a way, like put the actual content or like what you're doing first, like make sure this is quality, and then worry about all the strategies, tactics, tools, ways to market it, ways to make
Well,
it.
you still need a strategy, right? Because like, who are you, like, who's your dream customer, who you're trying to connect with. The tactic is still like, do I put this on Medium, or do I put this on my, on my blog? Is my, am I using WordPress? Am I using some of those tools that, sort of tease out the focus keyword? Am I using Open Graph to make sure that when I take that article and post it to Facebook, that it displays correctly on Facebook? Or like for Twitter, if you go through some people's Twitter feeds, like there are basically two ways Twitter will display an article. It'll either display it as a small, with a small photo and then the headline to the right of it, or it'll display it large, which is the big photo and then the headline and everything under it, right? So if you don't take care to manage those little details, then your tactics are messed up, right? Because you
Mm.
didn't take time to look at the Open Graph settings for specifically for Twitter, and you didn't take the time to really care about how it actually displays when you share it to another platform, right? I think I happen to think that's important, right? If you go to a major, let's call it a major Twitter feed, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, some big brand, I mean, someone would be fired for that. If they put a link that only had a small picture on it instead of a large picture, right?
Hmm.
But then when they do it on my blog posts, like, oh no, get the hell out of here, right? I can't. I need to make sure that that I'm operating at the same level so that I can create this work for my clients as well.
Hmm. So basically, just making sure that priorities are in order. That right now, a lot of people are kind of reversed it. Okay, like let's think about like what's the SEO, best way instead of focusing at first on what's the actual content. So now it's kind of secondary, and you are saying that you would always put it primary.
Well, so what I would say is this. I mean, as a digital marketing agency, I will not take a SEO client anymore, right? Like when I just want, I want to rank first for, drapes on the internet. I don't know, whatever it is, or dog food, right? I won't take that client. Why? Because it's not up to me, right?
Mm.
I can influence it's, a little bit here and there, but it's not my game, right? The rules keep on changing, right? So it's much better if I was to create a more direct response, if I was to create a website that I can then run ads to easily, if I can create landing pages easily that can, like, that specifically says, hey, we're running a special in, for Miami area residents or Chicago area residents, and then it's more local, it has more feeling, right? And then just running some generic campaign. The type of work that we work on now is not just like, we don't just do one thing for the client. It's most or all of these different activities, or it's nothing. We just walk away from it because
Okay.
if I just do social for you, like I get a lot of people that that come to me. It's like, oh, I want you to create a social campaign that's going to get me more likes. I'm sorry. Are you a likable guy? Or are you, it's like, it doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah.
I need to get to it. I need to get to it. Or one guy last week, he wanted me to create, he wanted me to help him on Instagram so that he can get verified. Verified is that little blue sticker next to people's names. I don't control that.
Mm.
Right? I tried to get verified already a couple times, and Instagram's not answering me. What am I going to do to help you? So no, I won't take those kind of. What I can do is I can create the content for you. I can create the environment so that it would be more inviting for people to come and consume your content and to buy your products. But I can't actually make them buy.
Mm.
Right? Let's say, for example, the price of your product is too high, or the sales process is too long. Like, there's not much I can do about that. Or if I'm doing this kind of work for, I don't know, a doctor, right? I don't know, for all the traffic that I send to their site and after all the leads that I send them, I don't know if this one person becomes a patient or not. Right? Because, we have laws here that protect privacy. They're not going to come back and say this person became a patient and this one didn't. I just hope that they, these leads do turn into, appointments. And if they do, great. If they don't, then you need to tell me. I'm not going to automatically know that, right? So there has to be this communication. There has to, it's got to make sense. for both sides, both for me and for the clients, on whether what it is that I'm doing actually works.
Mm. And what was it? Because you never really mentioned that, and I'm curious about this whole thing that you wrote, and I think somewhere on your site about this, transition when you used to say like, "Oh yes, sir, I'm gonna do that," to then finally, starting questioning whether the client is actually, has the right idea, and you kind of pitching them some maybe different idea. Did it just come, to you from experience, or getting more confident in marketing, or how did that come about, like that kind of transition?
I think it was both. So first of all, it's like I really need to understand what it is that I'm going to be creating content for, right? Like if you're trying to pitch me, I want you to let me see if I had this example of someone who wants to sell so I don't know if you had this where you're from, but like you go to a gas station over here, you can buy these little powder packets, and they're called like hangover mixes, right? So basically what you do is that you pull into a gas station at 2 in the morning, you buy this little package and you mix it in with the water, and it's supposed to help with your hangover by the next morning. Okay.
Hmm.
Something like that. I think it's just a bunch of vitamins and sugar and powder, that you put in, and and they sell it for $5, and I'm sure it costs 40 cents to create, right? So doesn't work. I don't know, I tried it once, I thought it tasted like shit, and I'm moved on, right? So then when I'm trying to create when I'm trying to create demand for it, it's like I don't necessarily believe in this product. Like I
Mm.
don't know if there's something that and these claims that they're making that it's healthy and it's FDA approved, and like, no, it's not. The FDA didn't look at you. They're like, no, it's not. It's like you put a couple of vitamins in there, right? Or whatever it is, and you really don't know what it is. So things like that, that if I don't understand them, right? And I'll be honest, there are a lot of things I don't understand, right? So I would just, I think it's just better to not get involved with it, right? There have been a few projects that I've gotten involved with that I did not understand, and I took the money because I needed the money, right?
Mm.
I'm sure we've all been there.
Yeah.
But I've also had to give back money on that as well, because once I realized that I'm not doing a service for this client, and it's just not working out, and I don't know what's going on. Okay, like, listen, it's just better for me to pull out and part as friends. There is nothing more satisfying than firing a client, right? Especially one that's treating you badly, and then being able to focus again on the clients that love you, as opposed to the clients that are always yelling at you, hey, you got to get this done, got to get this done, got to
Mm.
get this done. It's like, no, you don't own me, buddy. It's like, I'm doing my best. It's obvious I'm not getting it. Just move on, go find somebody who does, and good luck to you while you do it.
Yeah, but it takes kind of a bit of like thinking about the second order consequences and stuff like that, because a lot of times, yeah, like in the short term, like you want the money, but then you probably from experience, and me too, like getting a bad client, and then it's just like 5 times the work, 10 times the stress, and it just doesn't work out. Like then it wasn't worth the money.
Exactly, exactly.
So if I asked you, I don't know, because you were talking about like that you prefer to look at the digital marketing as like a, you could say holistically, that it's not just about this one specific thing, but like a series of different tools, strategies, tactics. Is there? So would it be a bad question to ask like what's like your favorite marketing channel at the moment?
My favorite marketing channel at the moment is paid ads, right?
Hmm.
Because paid ads gives you the most amount of clarity in the quickest amount of time, right? Like, okay, so take search engine optimization, right?
Hmm.
You need to create content, then you need to put it on other sites, and then you wait a couple of weeks to see where your site actually ranks, right? With a paid ad, like you can have clarity that afternoon, right? You put 3 ads up pointing to a specific page. You see the traffic coming into the page, and then no one's clicking on the offer. Well, now you can pivot. You can pivot tonight. You can pivot tomorrow, and change things around until you get people to, to click on it. So you're essentially paying for the data,
Mm.
and you're getting it very quickly, right? So it's that for me is the most satisfying of of all the channels, because now you're not just dealing with someone's perceptions of is this cute, is this nice, is this offensive, is this whatever. No, you just you put it out there, and also you can get really, really granular with with your targeting. So the
Mm.
joke or the example I say is, I can target all women born in Colombia, right, who have toddlers and now live in Sandusky, Ohio, which is a smaller town, somewhere in Ohio, right? I'll find all 7 of them, right? But, like you can do that with Facebook, right? Because if, Facebook does have all of this data on, on all of us, right?
Mm.
So if that's your target market, then great, then you're able to target them. And as long as you create a message that they will respond to, then they'll click on it and maybe they'll buy something from you. Right. So in short, what you're doing is that you're paying to access that data.
Yeah.
Right. And, like once you do that, then you can take action on it much quicker. So that's why, like paid ads is by far my favorite way to, my favorite way to move forward on projects.
So you don't mind the fact that, because you were saying that, for example, you're not a big fan of SEO because the rules keep changing. Isn't that kind of the case also with
Well,
many of
no, with
those
paid
paid
ads, I'm
ads?
paying for it. No, with paid ads, I'm paying for it. Whereas, with SEO, I have to make changes to the website and then wait for an algorithm change to happen. And then that could happen tomorrow, that can happen next week, or that could never happen. With
Hmm.
paid ads, it goes up and it's there. Right. So, and if it gets clicks, great. If it doesn't get clicks, then why isn't it getting any clicks? And you're able to pivot on that right away.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good. That's true. So let's pivot into podcasting, and where maybe it's kind of an up and coming medium, and where kind of its role lies now in the whole, like, your marketing efforts. Obviously you have something like paid ads, which you just mentioned, which are really great at getting data fast and paying for and making sure you get it. But on the other hand, you have things like, for example, now podcasting, which I think you are also a proponent of. For one thing, like kind of building your maybe influence status, but also talking with your potentially your audience. So maybe you can share a little bit your thoughts on what's the deal now with podcasting, and how can people maybe use, because I know there's 2 camps of podcasting, right? Like one is like maybe me just does it because I like talking to people, but there's also kind of a business side to it. So maybe you can talk about the business side of podcasting, and how can people use it to maybe grow, like even get sales.
Sure. So yeah, this is this for me was the most surprising, was using my podcast to connect directly with decision makers, right? And to interview prospective clients, right? Basically, when you go to, when I have when I have a coach on the line, or a CEO on the line, and I'm asking them questions, like, I'm not talking to their administrative assistant. I'm not talking to their vice president. I'm talking to the decision maker of that company, right?
Mm.
And what I found is, we're all human, and we all, we want to be heard, right? Whether you're just, some guy out of school, or whether you're a CEO of a big company, you want to be heard. And what happens is that, by being a guest on podcasts and being a podcast host, well, being a podcast host is interesting because you control the conversation, right? You're creating the foundation. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
So with a podcast, you're building a foundation and you're controlling the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So, like you can, there are no rules. Like, right now we're in an hour long podcast. I've been on a podcast that lasted a minute, where they ask one question and that's it. Right. So it's not like you're creating a TV show that's got to be exactly 23 minutes plus commercials. It's not like you have to get, different producers and everything. You could literally do this from your phone. Right. You don't need the big mic to do it. You don't need all this different, all that expensive equipment. You could literally get a $15 lav mic, connect it right here and go for it. Now, what happens is that, if if you set up your podcast, with the right premise and you target the right people, you could be interviewing your prospective clients, right? Because you're bringing them on and you're giving them a platform, right? You're giving them a platform to actually speak on your show. And your show doesn't need to have, you don't need to be a Joe Rogan or a Howard Stern and have millions and millions of listeners in order to do this. It people do people do tune in and people like to be heard on them, right? And what happens is that if you can deliver enough value, me as the podcast host, to the guest who's coming on, then I'm able to start and continue a conversation, right? Because now let's just take that CEO example of the guy who I interviewed. I'm now on a first name basis with the guy, right? I
Mm.
already have his direct information. I don't have to go through any gatekeeper anymore, right? So I'm able to go and and make a pitch, and if it makes sense, and be able to offer either the same services that I'm offering within my core digital marketing agency, or as part of the podcast marketing agency that I'm starting up, or to be part or any other type of medium that I'm putting together. I can interview them again at a later date on a different subject, like all this stuff. And really what it is that um it used to be networking was all about flying to San Francisco and going to a conference, and paying for an expensive hotel, expensive flight, and expensive ticket, and walking around and putting your business card in front of in people's hands all the time. Now I just invite them to the show,
Mm.
and they want to come on, and it's great because it's how, like, think about it, Conrad. How would you and I have met otherwise,
That's
if
tough,
it
right?
wasn't for this? Yeah, it's we're in some somewhat different worlds. We may have bumped into each other at a ClickFunnels convention, or at a traffic and conversion summit, or whatever, or whatever it is, right? But now but the fact that we were able to schedule this 2 weeks ago, and now we're talking and we're able to get to know each other. Next time I'm in your area, I'm going to be looking you up, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking to see, like what, if we can go out, have a coffee, or, or whatever it is, because we know each other now. Right. And I think that's really the biggest part of, a podcast, that you're able to create that relationship. You're able to get right there, into someone's ear, and, and really communicate a point. And hopefully you're interesting enough that people will listen to you again and again.
Mm. And especially, I think now is I don't know what's your take, but I think now it's a really perfect time for people to start, because this is a moment where you can't really do it any other way in most places in the world. So it's a really, well, one of the only ways now to really network and do the relationship building part, right?
Yeah, 100%. Because, as you can see, I'm in my bedroom. You got the baby Yoda and the bear behind me. It's like, where else am I going to work from? It's like, I can go to a WeWork here in Miami, but why? Like, I'm going to go over there and then I got to wear a mask all the time. And, everyone's sort of enjoying it. It's not fun anymore. Might as well just work from here now.
But do you think it's something that almost anyone can do, like anyone who has a business or something like that, or do you think it's only if you like it, or do you think it's just like one other marketing channel, like no matter if you like it or not, it's just effective, and there is no excuse not to do it?
I think that in order to be somewhat successful at it, you do have to like it, right? You do have to, if I was to go into this, like just really bored, Conrad, please, we just finish. No, that would be a boring conversation, right? I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a commercial landscape architect. Okay. Basically what that is, imagine a big building in Miami. that has beautiful palm trees around the perimeter, and then they have a rooftop pool, and then they have like bushes and flowers and other palm trees and everything set up. That's what he does, right? So he's not a landscape architect who goes to your house and puts up palm trees. Like, he'll only do big developments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had a conversation, and he asked me, he's like, I want to increase my reach. How can I do that? Right. But, this is a guy who only works with $500,000 to $1 million contracts. He only works on big buildings that are 50 stories or more tall, taller than 50 stories. Right. So he's not going to be sending sales letters to property managers, and he's tried, creating, like photo books of his beautiful properties and mailing them out to people. All of that is boring. Right. It doesn't really do the job. So I told him, I'm like, why don't you start a podcast? And he's like, why would I do that? Right? Like, why would I start a podcast? I'm like, well, imagine if, yeah, no. So I was like, well, I'll tell you, what if you were to get Jorge Perez? Jorge Perez, by the way, is the CEO of the Related Group. They have buildings all over the world, and they're based in Miami.
Oh, okay.
What if you were to get Jorge Perez on the line and you nerded out with him for a half an hour on property development? Well, how valuable would that be to you? He's like, oh my God, that would be my dream. I'm like, what about, getting Bjork Engels on the line? That crazy architect in Denmark, that does all those crazy things. Like, like, imagine you're talking with Bjork, not his VP, not his project manager, not his administrative assistant. You're talking to the man, right? What would that mean to you? It's like, no, that would be amazing. Okay, well, that's what I'm doing with my podcast, right? And who am I, right? I'm not a VP of anything, right? I'm not a, I didn't used to work at Coca-Cola or, or Facebook or Google. Like, I started this on my own, but I'm talking to these people, right? I'm talking to VCs, I'm talking to coaches, I'm talking to this whole wide range of people, right? So why wouldn't you, talk to property developers and to other architects and other people in your field, just to get the feel for what's happening in your business. And, who cares if your podcast gets 100 downloads? You're interviewing your prospective clients, right? What happens if you interviewed the guy who's who happens to be the developer on a new project that's opening up in Miami? Now you can call him up directly, right? And say, hey man, how's it going? I'd like to bid on your project. What do you think? Well, there you go. It's like, you already got the in. That is where the podcast gets really interesting for me, because you are networking with these interesting people, and you're talking about things that are really interesting for you, right? So if he was to bring me on the show, right? I mean, we could talk about marketing and all that, right? But he's not a marketer. He's a commercial landscape architect, right? He's a really soft-spoken guy. He speaks slowly, methodically, and all that. No, okay, that's the kind of personality that matches his, the work that he's doing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
imagine if he was to speak with more people like that. And I think I convinced him. Now I just got to get him to buy the equipment and, and go from there.
Nice. But I guess it's also like the one thing there I think to keep in mind is that there's also this fine line between, like inviting someone on the show, but at first, like, also you are just inviting them as an interview. So like not really having a hidden agenda, right? Because there's like this fine line where if it becomes that it's just like a smoke screen and it's actually like a sales
Well, if you
call.
come off as too salesy, yeah. I mean, like, I don't, when I'm interviewing people, I don't, like, hey, buy my digital marketing services. It's like after the interview, like after I turn off record, I'm like, listen, I'm a digital marketing agency. This is what I do. You can tell I can talk about this stuff all day long. Right. So if that's interesting for you, you have my direct contact info. Please feel free to reach out. Soft sell, and maybe, reach out to them, 1, 2, 3 times, afterwards, via a marketing automation campaign. That's really all it's needed. If it was meant to be, it was meant to be. And if not, then I have more content for building my authority. So it really is a win all the way around.
So how did, because you I did say that, but you actually have your own podcast, which is the One Big Tip, and actually a principle that you have there is like paid forward. So I'm curious, like how you got started with podcasts. Like where did you, because I didn't ask you, like where did you discover the powers of it, and what was the inspiration to finally like do it yourself? And now I think you stuck with it for quite a while. So I'm curious, like how did you find out the powers of podcasting, and what's behind this paid forward
Sure.
principles?
So I've learned a lot from podcasts, right? Just by listening to other marketers and all that, they're always dropping these value bombs and, use this tool and do that, so I'm always collecting this kind of information. So I've been a beneficiary of this kind of, of this kind of medium for a long time. Now, when I was coming out with the idea to do it on my own, first of all, when you work on a project like this for yourself, it is the hardest project you're going to work on, right? Do it for our clients, like, yeah, I'll smoke that like this. Do it for yourself, and it's like, geez, that took 2 years to put together, right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
always how it goes.
yeah, that's always how it goes. So what happened? I was working. I know I wanted to come up with a concept, something that had legs that I could apply it to a few different things, but at the same time, it had to be focused enough that I wasn't wasting my time or everyone else's time.
Mm.
So what happened was I ended up being on someone else's podcast where he kept it at 8 minutes, where he asked you 8 questions very, very fast, and you're on and off in 8 minutes, bro. Like like that was it. I'm like, yeah, I was in and out in 10 minutes. That's great. Right. And I was like, I wanted to do something like that. So the way I came up with the One Big Tip is, we come up with I'm going to talk to you about what is the one thing you use in your business that is actionable, measurable, tangible, that you'd be willing to share with someone else. Right.
Mm.
And it's not a mindset. It's not a manifestation, not a dream. It's not, oh, you just got to ask the right questions. Like, no, it's none of that. Right. So it's got to be something actionable. It's got to be something that you can do. So so the way I built it out was 10 to 15 minutes recorded. It's basically 3 questions, right? It's first of all, who you are and why you're awesome. What's your one big tip, and, why is it amazing? And then where can people find you? Right. That's really the foundation for it. And that is wide enough that I can talk with a whole bunch of different people on a whole bunch of different levels. Right. When I first started this, I started this back in November, December of last year. At first, I was like, how the hell am I going to find 4 people a month to talk to me? That was my biggest, because I knew I had to be consistent. I can't record 2 episodes and then come back in April. Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be consistent. So I'm like, how the hell am I going to find 4 people a month? So of course, first I dipped into friends and family, right? To, just talk about it. And not that I'm inviting you to do so, please don't do this. Okay. But if you listen to my first episodes, they need some work. Right. So obviously I've come a long way since then. Right. But, when I started putting the word out there, like 4 turned to 10, 10 turned to 20, 20 turned to 40, 40 turned to 60 people that I interviewed. And then I'm like, holy shit, man, there are only 52 weeks in a year. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to interview you now. And, oh, by the way, your episode's going to come out next October. Like, no, like that didn't work. Right. And then, so I changed the cadence to twice a week. Right. So now we drop on Tuesdays and Fridays. And the people's just kept on coming, right? And they're still coming. And I get 2 or 3 requests a day now, for people to come on the show. And I'm I have a thing on my website saying, listen, buddy, I'm recording now about 7-8 months ahead. I may change it to 3 times a week, going forward. Like, I haven't quite figured that out yet, but but that's where I'm at. And it's, if it's good for you, great. If not, you could pay me a fee and you can jump to the front of the line, if you're trying to promote a course or whatever, right? Maybe try to get some money out of it, right? But yeah, for the most part, people are still coming because they see the traction. So it's like, and again, I'm not getting crazy download numbers. I'm not super popular. People don't stop me on the street. Spotify isn't throwing money at me, right? But it's not about that. So first of all, I'm doing I'm doing this podcast as a lead gen tool, as a networking opportunity, right? And and I'm doing it for my own self-education because I'm talking to a lot of great, interesting people,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point, right? Like you learn
Yeah,
also through the
yeah,
process.
but so I'm learning a lot, and there's a lot of stuff you can do with this, right? Like you can go and create a virtual summit afterwards. You can go and create ebooks off of all the stuff that you learned. You can start categorizing it and just repackaging the content that I already have into other info products. There's a lot of things that you can do here, right? And what happens is that, now it's like, I think I recorded like episode 147 yesterday, right? And I only published episode 70 today, right? So
Oh,
I'm
damn.
literally, I literally have more episodes recorded that haven't been heard yet than episodes that have been heard, right? If I don't take not one more interview, I will have content through June, July of next year, right? And that just blows me away that how so many people have that much confidence in me, right? And they have that much like, and they like the message, and they like the premise of what it is that I have to say. So getting back to your original question about the pay it forward, like I've always been a pay it forward type of guy, right? I used to get phone calls that for some reason it was like the 6-month period where every month I would get phone calls from people who would be like, "Hey Jeff, I need your help to build an app." Really? Tell me about the app, man. Well, you know how you take pictures with your phone? Well, I'm going to do this thing where I'm going to put filters on it, and you're going to be able to tag them, and you can like tag your friends. And I'm like, "Really, buddy? Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you just describe Instagram to me?"
Yeah, I was just about to say Instagram.
Right. And they're like, "No, no, 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 you don't." And no, and they're like, "No, Jeff, you don't understand. My app's going to be social." All right, buddy. Right. I swear to God, that was a legit conversation that I had. Right. So I don't just hang up the phone on these people. Okay. I walk them through, like why their idea is a little bit misguided, and where they're going wrong. And it's like, listen, man, the guys that developed WhatsApp and the guys that developed Instagram, these aren't, they didn't just, these weren't dumb shit kids in their garage. Like these are people that worked at Yahoo. They worked at all these
Yeah.
other companies. They're very well funded. Like, this didn't just pop out of the ground, right? And when I explain things to them in those terms, they remember it. They remember, like, this wasn't a 5-minute phone call. It was actually a 45-minute phone call where I went through the whole thing in a non-threatening way of why their idea is actually not that great. And what happens is that they appreciate it, right? Because they could have gone to Upwork and say, "I want to create an app that filters and tags photos," and there are 50 to 200 developers which will say, "Yes, I will build you that app for $1,000, $2,000, $5,000." They'll build it. Of course, they'll build
Yeah.
it. You won't make any money from it, but they'll build it, right? Whereas I'm just like, "Listen, buddy, you're going down the wrong path. Here's why, and this is what you need to be doing." They remember that, and then they call me up like a year later. I've had one 5 years later. "Hey Jeff, you remember when you talked to me about that idea, stupid idea that I had? Well, now I got a better one. I learned a lot since then, and now now I have this business where I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Can you help me out with that?" Okay, now we have something to talk about, right?
Hmm.
Because I was nice to them beforehand, right? I told them I told them, "Listen, I could very easily sell you on this and you will give me your money because I'm that good." Right. But I don't want to take your money for 6 months and then you hate me. Right. So I was never like that. And, it's good karma. It's good energy. So that's why I try to pay it forward. And that's also what the podcast is all about, right? It's, people are giving of their time, they're giving of their expertise. And, how is that not the embodiment of paying it forward as opposed to paying it back? You know?
Yeah, that's what I love about podcasting. It's just got this kind of great feel to it. It's like started at something like that comedians did independently, now grew to this, but it's like this big, in a way, fuck you to the mainstream of like this big, TV TV shows and all that's very like kind of,
But it
formatted and
doesn't, but think about it this way. So I hear what you're saying about fuck you to the mainstream, but it's not really about that. It's about, never before in our history, in our parents' history, whatever, never before, like our parents did not have a platform,
Mm-hmm.
right? They grew up, they got their jobs, they did whatever it is they needed to do. And, like nobody gave them a platform. Now my kids have a platform, right? All they need to do is just point this thing and go on TikTok and, they can, if they're funny enough or talented enough, they can be discovered. Right. And that's really the big difference. I mean, that's really, why, it's such a game changer. So it's not really about, so my kids still look at me like, oh, dad, like, you're so cool. Like, you're like, dude, you got this big microphone on your desk, like, they're like swag, So, I get that all the time from the 15-year-old. And it's like, okay, great. So now, great. My kids think that I'm cool. That's wonderful. I think they're cool too. But what happens is that, they see that I'm actually going out there and meeting other people in a way that, is non-threatening. It's not, it's mutually beneficial. So it's, why wouldn't you do that? Why, like how else are you, Konrad, going to put your name out there? Are you going to go buy a billboard on Madison Avenue? Are you gonna do a meetup like Nas Daily every time he goes into a major capital around the US? Or are you gonna, just say, hey, I'm the Yerba Mate guy, and you're not
Yeah.
even Argentinian. So it's like, so that's your thing, like that's what you built. And, that becomes your character, becomes your persona. Right. Just for me, like, I start interviewing somebody and then they notice the Baby Yoda in the background. Boom. Now we're talking about the Mandalorian for 15 minutes, and we're nerding out on that. And it's fun. It's fun that you can connect with people on, that kind of level.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but maybe I kind of miss. I just want to say it's like one point in all of it, but there's a bigger,
Mhm.
yeah, as you said, a bigger reason. But let's just one of the last things I wanted to turn tables on you a little bit and ask then
Sure.
if your premise of your podcast is like what is your one big tip, then I can't help it but ask you like what is your one big tip?
If a year ago, if you would have told me I'd be on this podcast with you today, right? And I'd have so many episodes recorded that I don't even know what to do with, I would have been like, that's a lie, right? And I was the kid that stuttered in school, right? I was the kid, I bought all the great equipment. I'm doing this on a DSLR webcam, I got the nice mic and all that. But at the end of the day, it's like, I wanted to be a YouTuber, I wanted to be this, and I just like, no, I got a face for radio, right? And like that's it. I'm like, okay, I am not good at doing doing the video editing, and I just needed to make my life simpler, so that's how I got into podcast. If I had known how effective of a networking tool podcasting is, shit, I would have done this 10 years ago.
Mm.
Right. And, and 10 years ago, podcasting was a thing as well. The app just came out for the, on the iPhones, and that's what really made it popular. And, there were a lot of people that really embraced that medium. And, there are lots of success stories. I can, list off 10 right now. But I think that what a lot of people don't like even realize is that yes, there are a lot of steps that go into producing each episode, right? So just in my project management tool, there's like 30 steps that needs to happen between getting it recorded, getting the sound guy to edit it, listening to it, then writing social media around it, writing a blog post, getting the transcription, writing the, creating the graphics, posting it up there, and then, yeah, that's time, effort, and money that, that needs to happen, right? But what is the net benefit? The net benefit is that I'm interviewing prospective, prospective clients, and I'm providing a platform, a foundational platform, not only for myself, but for them. So it's a win-win all the way around. So my one big tip, is you really should be putting yourself out there. I mean, if you're camera shy, fine, be camera shy, then record audio, right? And if you're not so camera shy, then, record the video as well, just live stream it. Who cares? When you're starting out with your audience anyways, and the only person that's watching your live stream is your mom, then fine, then it's your mom. It's like no one else is going to notice, right? So you can't mess up that bad because nobody saw it, right? So, and you'll only get better. You'll only get better with time. You'll only get better with with interviewing, and just getting it out there. And what I mentioned earlier, I've been on podcasts that lasted a minute, where the guy just say, "Hey Jeff, how you doing? Tell me what's what's the one thing you'd rather do tomorrow?" I don't know. And like that was the whole thing, right? And then you get on this this other thing, and they ask you all kinds of questions, including how's your dog, and how's your this, and how's your that, and it's like, okay, yeah, boring, but still it's it still created a platform. It's still I chalk it up to training, training and networking, right? I'm going to meet this guy probably 2 years from now in some podcasting convention or some marketing convention or whatever, and we're going to remember each other. Why? Because we've had this connection, right? So yeah, that's my big push right now is, start it. There are no rules behind it. There is a loving community that is willing to help you every single step of the way. You don't need to go wild with it, buying $1,000 of equipment, although you do sound a lot better if you do. And
That's a one small tip.
yeah. So, the thing about, just talking really quickly about this, like this microphone, right? It's a dynamic mic. And the cool thing about dynamic mics is that it excludes all the other noise. So even when I talk, like move the microphone away, you can hear the difference, that it's not as loud, right? And then when I come back in really close, you get my Barry White voice again, so it gets really cool. Even if I was to switch, the microphone to the AirPods, you would hear a marked difference, right? So yeah, is the equipment important? Yeah, it's kind of important, but it's not necessary to start. Right. So you can literally start this out on your iPhone with with the headphones that came with it, and graduate when it's time to graduate.
I love the tip. I have to say, I love the tip.
Thank you, Konrad.
So maybe like, what are your last thoughts? Maybe you can also tell people like where they can find you if they would be interested in one, checking out your podcast. That's one thing. A second, maybe your digital marketing services. Who knows what people need? And maybe something that you wanted to say, but I didn't ask you. And it's just...
Sure. So yeah, just I think by now you've gotten a pretty good idea of what my personality is about, and how passionate I get about this stuff. But if you want to look me up, very easy, jeffmendelson.com, jeffmendelson.com. On there is a link to the podcast, so you can listen to all the episodes that we have there. Find me on LinkedIn, and again, I invite people to reach out to me. I love chatting about this stuff. I love, just meeting new people, and, and interfacing, and, just, any way I can pay it forward, it all comes back to you with good energy. So, please feel free to reach out.
Nice. Thanks so much, Jeff. It was beautiful. 2 hours, almost exactly 2 hours of conversation. So thanks again so much. And, let's hope our paths meet at some point. Cross.
Oh, they will. I got to get back to Poland, man. That was beautiful. That was a beautiful place. So,
yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on the show.